All right, welcome into this edition of Carps Corner. Excited, obviously, to finish up breaking down the rest of the season. It's melancholy a couple days after the college football playoff semifinals. There, obviously tough. A lot of rough news for Ohio State. So you watched the end of that game, very, very difficult to handle. But as things begin to move on, start to come to the realization, okay, time heals a lot of things. You start appreciating the season for what it is, appreciating CJ Stroud for what he was able to do. And got a couple of things, a number of stuff that I want to ultimately get to and try to figure out here as we break this thing down. Um, before we get to that, I want to focus a little bit on Ryan Day and the play calling and passion that he demonstrated during the game. And it's not something that we see a lot out of him. He's been a little bit more reserved as of late, first time head coach, but it's been a number of years, obviously go through the COVID year, all these different things, third time in the CFP. And you finally felt like you saw a little bit about what Ryan Day truly was, the passion, the energy. And frankly, I think it's something that Buckeye team needed. Like they needed their coach to be himself and to be the best version of himself on that day. And holy smokes, that's what he was. And he called a great game. And on top of that, had that energy and passion. I think it was spilling over and it was infectious to everybody else out on the field. And maybe it spilled over even to his quarterback a little bit. And CJ coming in, everybody was lamenting him running this and that, passion, fire. And CJ's from California. He's a cool operator. I've been waiting for a while to kind of see this guy just embrace and the leadership role and show some of that fire and that passion and some of that competitive nature that like you see it in points on the field, but you don't necessarily see it all the time. And I don't know if it was Ryan helping to bring that out of him or CJ kind of, got Ryan excited. But I mean, I feel like you saw the best version of those guys. And a lot of that I felt like was driven by Ryan and his presence and how he was going to operate. And so very, very pumped about that. And hopefully that's something we see more of. As he's talking about giving up play calling duties. That's another thing. I think he's probably wanted to kind of step back a little bit from that. A lot of guys that are head coaches, and we see, Jimbo Fisher still, finally after struggling mightily at A&M and probably getting leaned on hard about bringing in, Bobby Vitrino, but bringing in someone that can help call plays for him because it's hard. You go look in the last 15 or so years, Jimbo Fisher was the only guy to win a national championship as a primary signal caller on either side of the ball. Saban doesn't do it. Kirby Smart doesn't do it. Urban Meyer didn't do it. Ed Orgeron, Les Miles. You start rolling through all these guys. Lincoln Riley did, but he never made it, to a CFP and to the finals. And so was never even able to play for a national championship. So it's really hard, to ultimately do that. And so as you sit there and look through all of that, you're going back to 2013 when Jimbo won one. But it's been in Pete Carroll with his time at USC. There really wasn't a primary play caller, that was able to do that because there's just so much to manage now, even outside of just the game-day stuff, but the operations. And so if Ryan gives up play calling duties and delegates them out, it's not like he's not going to be involved, in the game planning and everything, but letting somebody else be the primary market for that on game day, that frees you up to manage the game. It frees you up to honestly make sure other things are going appropriately. And when you're the head coach, you're the CEO, you'd like to just think, hey, I came up this way and this is what I did and this is how we're going to operate and I can stay in my lane. No, you need to ultimately be involved in a lot of ways with everything that's going on. So that I think is a good thing. And we'll see. Is it going to be Justin Fry, the offensive line coach? Is it going to be Brian Hartline? Is it going to be a combination? Does Corey Dennis factor into the mix? Are there any changes going to be on staff as we even move forward? So there's a lot of different things that ultimately need to be resolved. And I trust in Ryan Day to be able to get all that fixed because he's a guy that is very pointed. He's a guy that came from the NFL. He understands how to get things done. We need to have plans for a lot of things. And you can't just sit there and hope things are going to get better and hope for change without enacting yourself. So kudos to Ryan being able to get that done and work through it. someone else asked me about this. I saw this kind of floating around, grading Jim Knowles in his first year. I'd give him a B plus. I know people would probably say a lot lower. I mean, you look at the team they came in; they were worlds different for the overwhelming majority of the season. Let some plays out against Michigan. Had some plays that she gave up against Georgia, but you're talking about two other teams that are in the CFP, two of the other best teams now. So the question is, how do you continue to do what you did all regular season? How do you carry that over into now playing some of these elite teams at the end of the year and in the college football playoff? Because that's what it's all about. A lot of it's going to be players, and you have to make sure your players are executing. So some of that's getting the right guys in. And if they're not executing, getting other guys in there on top, you need to have the requisite talent. You feel like Ohio State has great talent, but they have the talent, the right positions are the guys being, ultimately executing at the level of what they need to do. And are they equipped with the right skill set to be able to do it? And sometimes it takes a year or two to build that in a system. So I'm going to give him a B plus. I know a lot of people might give him, maybe a B minus or a C plus. Like, well, what did we bring him in here for? If not to, win these games. Okay. They got some stops. They made some plays. They have to figure out how to continue to be aggressive in spots, but then without giving up the big play, without giving up the shot. That is going to be the question. That'll be the challenge for Jim Knowles and Ryan Day. And then with that, I had the question that was posed to me, and someone reached out. Now, I'm glad they did. I just checked it before the show because I think it's a pretty interesting question. It said, how is it that Iowa's defense is top 5, top 10 nationally when they recruit 2 and 3 star guys? And Ohio State recruits all these great players, and they've struggled. Well, I think you look back, some of that was a little bit of scheme, some of that was execution, the previous years. When Luke Fickell was here, things were really good for a long time, and they recruited a blend of guys and got them to play really well. And then you saw kind of a fall off after you saw Chase Young, Okuda, all those guys leave from that team, and you have top 5 draft picks in there, so that covers up some of that. And then obviously the struggles of the last couple seasons. But here's the deal: Iowa, they may have a top 5 defense statistically, and they're good, and they can execute. Ohio State hung over 50 on them. Okay, over 50. Okay, Georgia has a top 10 offense, 8th in total yards, 9th in scoring, or vice versa. They're really good. Georgia has a really good defense. People say one of the best in the country. Ohio State scored a lot on them. Some of that is just college football now, and some of it is going to be the competition you play. I wouldn't play anybody in the Big Ten that scores a lot of points, especially in the West. They play, a team like Ohio State that can spread you out and score the football. They get roasted. Play a team like Penn State that's got weapons. They're generally going to get after you. A lot of that comes down to having an elite quarterback play. And so as good as Iowa is, you see what happens when they play elite competition. They get housed. They get housed. And so they're good. They execute on a high level. But once their players are outmatched physically, then it's done. And so the question is, how do you get elite players to execute the way that Iowa's do? Because they execute at a really high level. It's just the fact that once they play real other great players, they're going to really struggle. And that's the reality. All right. So now, oh goodness, we've got some portal news. And we'll throw this up here. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, played at Ohio State for 5 years. He's entering the transfer portal. Defensive end, played sparingly this year, made some plays. They probably didn't develop the way that everybody would have liked to see him. And he's still got some eligibility left. Better to probably keep playing than ultimately go to the NFL. And so then I'll throw this one up here. My guy J-Book talking about the vaunted 2021 class. Some of the guys that have already left. Ewers obviously left before. You roll through some other defensive backs that I don't think are big losses, but really J.K. Johnson in there. This is going to be his 3rd year. He started about 5 games this season. He played a ton, and I thought was poised to continue to grow and be a really good player. And so it's kind of disappointing to see him leave. And especially now as we throw this up, you start looking at the cornerback depth at Ohio State. Denzel Burke played pretty well, especially at the end of the season, got better. Felt like he started getting locked in. Jordan Hancock was hurt much of the year. He started getting better. He started getting locked in. Jair Brown, saw some really good things out of him. J.K. Johnson was supposed to be that other young guy with him. Those guys were going to be kind of the next heirs apparent. But you have Ryan Turner, then a couple incoming freshmen who are unproven. So it's a really thin room again. And last year it was a good room at the top, but it was thin. And so you had to get some guys going and get them juiced up. But that's tough. I mean, that's to me a big loss in the transfer portal. And he was a long guy. I think he was an ESPN top 100 player and, a huge piece. And I thought he was developing nicely. And so you see guys leave and it's a head scratcher. We'll see where he emerges and where he pops up. But, who knows why guys choose to do ultimately what they do, but leaving Ohio State very thin at the corner position. Now, they've got a transfer coming in from Syracuse, very talented player that we'll get into later. They're still working through some offensive line stuff to try to bolster some of the depth there in the portal. But, the guys that have kind of left outside of that, not huge losses. And it looks like really the majority of everybody else is going to come back. But obviously some tough news right there with that. And then I'll throw this up. Ohio State loses some guys in the strength staff. Ohio State strength coach Nico Palazetti, who's been here for 6 years, going to Cincinnati to become the head coach there. Also, Quinn Barham, who is a strength coach there. I know those guys real well. I mean, they do a great job. He's leaving to become the head strength coach at Coastal Carolina, played at Penn State. He's a Carolina guy. Nico played at Michigan State. Great opportunity to go to Cincinnati. So Mickey Marotti's going to have his hands full trying to fill 2 spots. It's one thing to fill one guy a year. That happens a lot. A lot of attrition when you have a strength program as good as Ohio State's, but still tough to honestly try to replace all of those guys or 2 guys at once. Then we got Jim Harbaugh and him. And he's apparently looking around as I throw this up. John U. Bacon, who I trust more than anyone when it comes to Michigan reporting and Michigan football, always locked in, always knows what's going on. And so for him to come out here and say that, or not Jim Harbaugh. So for him to come out here and see that Jim Harbaugh is leaving, if he gets an opportunity, now nothing is imminent, but had a conversation with Carolina. I could see the Colts being interested. Last year, he would have died to have left, and there wasn't any takers. He was meeting with Minnesota on signing day. But then you have those 2 open. Denver's open. There'll be 3 or 4 other jobs that'll also come open. So it'll be interesting to see after the last 2 years, Jim Harbaugh's now 59. Does he ultimately go? And does anybody want him? Because I think he'll leave. He'll leave if he has the opportunity. But he's got to get it. And I don't know that he will. But I could see ties with Jim Irsay. He played for the Colts. He's got ties to the organization from being there. He was successful as a quarterback. You look at the last 2 guys, Jeff Saturday, interim coach, they bring in because he played there. Frank Reich, the coach who they fired this season, was there. He was an assistant before that with the Colts before they brought him over from Philadelphia. So there's a pattern of hiring people they would know Jim Harbaugh and they'd have some insight into that. So we'll see ultimately what happens there with everything. And now the last piece of this, I want to throw this up here. Looking with Mayan Williams tweeted out today that he, is, I think, allegedly going to return, which is great for Ohio State. Looks really good. With him, reportedly returning, you look at ultimately what Ohio State has coming back. Him, Evan Pryor, Travion Henderson, boom. You feel really good about that. Plus, they've got a handful of big recruits coming in at wide receiver. You're going to be able to have Emeka back. You're going to have Marvin back. You're going to have Julian Fleming back. Hopefully, Cade Stover returns, which after his back getting nicked up, I think that's probably more likely than maybe not now. You have G. Scott. You saw a lot of Joe Royer out there. So the offensive skill position players are going to be stacked. The question it becomes, the inside of the offensive line looks to be pretty intact. Hopefully, Luke Whippler will, continue to be maintaining the mix at center because I think he's really good there. But replacing those tackles, Paris and Big Thanos, that's going to be the challenge because those guys were locked in. They did a great job against Georgia. And so you're going to need to replace some depth right there at that offensive tackle position. So they're going to need to hit the portal hard to make sure you get some guys in here who can play while you're still trying to develop some of the young guys. And let them battle it out in the spring and kind of see who emerges. Because that, to me, will be the secret sauce for Ohio State. If they can develop those young offensive linemen, and if they can get some portal tackles to come in there and help bolster and give them a little bit of depth, that is going to be key, and that will be critical. So up next, we'll listen to a little bit of sound here, some of the stuff in the post game from Ryan Day, react to that, talk a little bit about what some of those things mean, and then CJ and some of his parting messages to Ohio State and to Ryan Day and everything that it meant for him to play here. So we'll get into all that here coming up as well. All right, and a couple more things we want to get to here. Got some sounds, some different things Ryan Day said, after the game, breaking down a little bit about what that means, getting to a prediction for the national championship game, and maybe talk about some guys that hopefully they'll come back for the Buckeyes. That would be huge. But want to get to this. First of all, Ryan Day talking about in the post game why he decided, the play calls, the last 25 seconds. People were highly critical of it. His thoughts on that.
We didn't have 2 timeouts left, and they were going 0. So if you split one, you could come out the back end there. 2 timeouts left, any couple yards right there can add to the field goal, and that was the idea. Didn't quite execute it as well as we would like to, but I wouldn't change that call.
I didn't have a problem with those play calls. They were trying to get it closer. He wanted to obviously finish up the game with a closer field goal. You try to pop one. My only thing is maybe you should have just ran it twice. If they didn't expect you to run it once, run it twice. You had another timeout still that you could burn. You didn't want to take a sack. I get that. Almost happened on third. And, obviously you're trying to get one in there to Xavier as well, and that doesn't necessarily work out. So I get it. I understand why he did it. Trying to turn a 50-yarder into a 46, maybe run it twice, maybe get that thing down to, 44 yards. And then that's much more manageable, I think, than 50, even though the 50 is not crazy long. Here's Ryan on losing Marvin, and then ultimately what CJ was able to do and how he had to step up.
To say that losing Marv didn't have an impact on the game, it absolutely did. What this guy did and the way he competed in the second half with all those things coming at him, I just can't say enough. I'm so proud of the way he played. He's not the only one, but he's sitting right here, and he's the quarterback of this team. And just the way that he attacked this game, I couldn't be any prouder of the way he did that. Because, like you said, that we were missing some guys out there. We were trying to figure it out, and in the biggest stage, played one of his best games, in my opinion.
So obviously losing Marvin was huge, but really impressed with CJ. That was the most, I think, aggressive CJ Stroud we've seen over his time at Ohio State. That was the most animated. It's probably the most animated we've seen Ryan Day as well. And so I like that. That was pretty big. So ultimately you've got to, to begin to be aggressive, and he attacked it. Like you said, CJ attacked it. And you watched him when he pulled that ball down. There were times where he was going to run and he knew he was going to get yards, and he led his team, man. He led his team, and that's ultimately what you needed to do. Here's Ryan talking about the targeting situation, something that I know is the bane of many Buckeye fans.
I was told that it was not targeting, that he didn't take a shot to the head, which is hard for. I didn't see it, so I don't know. But to get a concussion and not get hit in the head, I have to see the replay. And they said that it happened after he got hit, but I'd have to take a look at the video. I wasn't able to see the replay.
That right there is a guy who says, I think it was targeting, called it targeting. Guy got a concussion for getting hit in the head, whether it's by his helmet or by his shoulder, should probably be called. But I'm going to sit here and say I haven't seen it yet on the film, so that way that I'm not saying anything that I don't need to say. I know they've reached out to the Big Ten, or they reached out to the officials. I think they're Pac-12 officials, Big 12 officials, maybe. No explanation, really. Nobody really has any solution for it. The fact that they threw it, why did you pick it up? Why did you change it? And we'll get into this in some shows about, the Big Ten, maybe Ohio State getting pushed around for not being as assertive. And we'll talk about that. Here's Ryan talking about his team swinging, playing absolutely as hard as they could, running tons of offensive plays.
I thought our team came out and swung and played hard in this game, came up short, came down to one play. It wasn't just the last play. There was a lot of plays in the game that, you wish you had back as coaches and players, and just that's what happens in a game like this. But I told the guys I'm proud of the way that they played. I'm proud of the way they competed. And, for the older guys, the seniors, proud of what they've done for the program. But, for the younger guys, and the guys that are coming back, it's an opportunity.
The team swung, team played really hard, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. You know, and you're proud of the way they played, but it's a performance business. And this right here, this next piece with Ryan, I think is what's really critical. And he understands is, you play great, you swing hard, you're proud of your players, you're proud of everything. And, a lot of fans like, hey, not that this undid the Michigan loss, but you felt like, hey, they responded. That may have been a one-off, but it's ultimately a performance business, and Ryan gets it.
Doesn't mean anything if you don't win, though. And I think that's probably what hurts the most, is that when you put that much work and that much energy and that much time into something, and you're right there, and you just you don't get the victory. And this is a performance business, and you win or you lose, and we lost the game, and that's just what hurts to our core, and that's what it is. And we're here to win, and it didn't happen. But that being said, yeah, we came out. We guys were flying around. We were competing. In the end, we came up short. We'll have to figure out how to get it fixed in the off season so that when we're here again, we're on top when it comes to it.
That's what it is. I mean, it stinks, but for it to be a memorable performance, one that's for the ages, like you've got to almost come up with a victory right there. And Ryan's not going to sit there and talk about moral victories. That's not what he's about, and he completely gets it. But he also thinks at a point like that, there's reflection. You feel like you should have won.
Yeah, you can see the energy and passion on the sideline, and you can see the way guys were playing physical. I mean, listen, that's a good team. Let's call it for what it is. They're defending national champs, undefeated. They're a good team, but I don't think there's one guy in that locker room that doesn't feel like we should have won the game. And I think again, that's a part of this thing that is going to sit in our stomachs for a long time.
The energy, the passion, you feel like the team played well. You feel like you should have won. You ultimately didn't. You did everything you could. You prepared well. You prepared hard. Things happened outside your control a little bit, which is kind of crazy. And that's some of the things I'm going to get into this real quick. And no one's really talked about this. And Ohio State didn't push it near as hard as they should have. And I look at that as a whole organizational thing. So I feel like Ryan wanted to make a bigger deal about this. The fact that, when they're having their walkthroughs and practices at Georgia in the Mercedes-Benz Dome, it's in Atlanta. You're playing Georgia. It's not like you're practicing at home. And they found a camera in there because Ohio State chose to walk around and check everywhere and all the boxes and had people sweep it from the Georgia Dome. And you find this random camera that's pointed down at the field. Apparently, they said it was filming the banners for ESPN. ESPN didn't know anything about it. And so that thing's filming there. And that's the reality of some of the stuff that you have to deal with. And Ohio State should have come out firmer at the beginning. Be like, listen, trying to film our stuff. They're going to deny it and act like they don't know anything about it. But there's only one reason for a camera to be in there, and it's not some cheap camera. You got a nice camera in there filming this stuff. There's only one reason for that. And maybe that happens in some parts of the country, but that's something that needs to be addressed. And Ohio State, if you come out, it looks like it's complaining. No, forget that, man. If people are trying to film your stuff, you got to let people know about that. Document it. Make it known. Because that's something that there's no place for that in football. And that's there's no place for that in sports, man. Go win fair and square, prepare, work hard, do what you need to do. And the fact that wasn't made a bigger deal, because Ohio State should have pressed it, because it's not whining. It's a fact and it's a reality. And that's something that's trying to happen. You wonder else what could have potentially happened with all of that. And it's a different set of standards that they have. So they need to get that thing tightened up and taken care of. Last thing, CJ talked about his coach. And I always listen to players, how they speak about their coaches, what they say, the terms they use, the emotion they use behind it. Let's take a listen.
We should have won the game, of course. I definitely think we should have won the game. So we just got to lick our wounds and keep going. But Coach Day did a hell of a job, man. His leadership, and even though people would talk and do this and do that, and he just keeps showing up. And when you see a man like that, that's a true man. A man in the arena. Really, everybody on our team, we didn't splinter. We didn't turn eye to eye and start pointing fingers when we lost. We owned up our mistakes, and we just kept fighting. We kept swinging like our culture is. And I mean, I wouldn't want to play for anybody else. Play with anybody else. So I mean, Coach Day, hell of a coach.
So he praises the leadership Ryan has. Keeps showing up. He doesn't talk about it, the play calls. He talks about him more as a man and the leadership, and just keeps showing up and didn't get down. Leaned into the guys hard, challenged them, and just kept showing up each and every day. And that's what leadership is. And hopefully that rubbed off on CJ and you saw some of that success ultimately happen in the game, because you see what he was able to do and the impact that he ultimately had. So it's tough. CJ Stroud leaves, made to CFP, never beat Michigan. It's a bitter pill to swallow, I know, for him, and had one of the great games that I've seen as a Buckeye quarterback, despite the fact that it was in a loss. And that's just the reality of what he's going to have to deal with that. Couple other quick things. There's some guys that talked about potentially, going to the draft. Cade Stover, I hope that he comes back. I know that Steel Chambers is coming back. He lives with Tommy and Cade. Those three all live together. So Steel coming back. Hopefully you get like the three amigos back. Cade, injured his back. And sometimes that impacts whether guys leave or not as they start looking, could I be ready to go? And, what would my opportunities be? Should I not be able to prepare? So we'll see where he's at physically with that. And then, Tommy Eichenberg, who second team All-American, played really well, did a lot of great things this year. He's probably got the opportunity to leave. I hope for one, Tommy comes back. I think that there's still room for him to grow and develop. But he's also has the capability to go play in the NFL, and he would get drafted probably the same either year, maybe a little higher next year, but you have no idea. You have no idea. If you had a crystal ball that said, should I stay or should I go? We'll see. But I've loved the progress that Tommy Eichenberg's made. The criticism he got last year I thought was undue, given the fact that he hadn't really played and the system was a mess. There's a lot of things going on. And you saw him play great this year. And he's a quiet guy, but his leadership was huge. Kind of same thing with Cade Stover. Those guys, I think, get impressed and played much better than what people thought. So we'll monitor that situation. And then, also, see what happens on the offensive line, departure of some guys. Potential guys that can leave. Both tackles are gone. See if anyone leaves inside and kind of how that ultimately looks as well. And lastly, prediction for the game. We go out to California, doing some work with XM. Sirius XM, I'm going to be out there with the Dot the I's podcast with Warden Berm and those guys. So we'll see kind of what happens out there. But I think Georgia wins this thing by at least 10. I'd like to see TCU challenge them. I'd love to see it be a game. If it is, that'd be fantastic. But, we'll kind of see how it goes. I think the national championship game was in Atlanta on New Year's Eve. And unfortunately, Buckeyes came up just a little bit short in that game, because I think they would have been able to take care of TCU too. Not that it would have been easy, but I think that would have been a national championship. So unfortunate to see that. And I think Georgia ultimately wins this thing. But I hope that I'm wrong. So we'll kind of see where it goes. But thanks for tuning in. Appreciate this episode. And enjoy it. And we'll talk again after the national championship.